Okay, so hello and welcome to everyone to another program in our sustainability series. My name is Heath, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Morrow Memorial Library in Norwood. Just a few quick notes. Out of courtesy to our presenters, please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. There will be a Q&A at the end, so feel free to send your questions into the chat to be covered at the end, or hold on to them until Ian and Declan open up for questions. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our community partners, Together Yes and Progress Norwood. And we're happy to have a representative of Progress Norwood here, Julie, and she just has a few quick things to share before we get started. So Julie, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. Thank you to the library, and thank you to Together Yes and Susan Clare for putting this together. Katie Neal Rizzo is our green team leader. They are throwing, they plan Norwood's Earth Day every year, which is coming up. It's on Sunday, April 24th. From 10 to 11:30, we're going to be doing cleanups. I'm going to post the link when I'm done, and you can sign up to clean up at your kid's elementary school. Oh, here we go. There's the thing. The website is tinyurl.com, and I will /2022 Norwood Earth Day, but I'll put that in the chat in a minute. After the cleanups, from 11:30 to 1:30, there's a community picnic and fair on the town common. They're doing bike swaps. There's going to be music. There's a bunch of different organizations that will have tables, so it'll be a really fun time. And there's raffles, a sneaker recycling book swap. There's lots of things, and the library will be there as well, I think. And then another thing that Progress Norwood is doing is we are actually selling Great American rain barrels at a discount. Oh, thank you for the flyer, Heath. I will post the link to get these as well. You sign up to get it now, and then pickup is on Saturday, April 30th at the Cleveland. I got a couple of these several years ago. They're awesome. I believe they're made out of like recycled olive oil barrels or something, or olive barrels. So they're really cool. They're really helpful. So I'm going to pass it off to the Neponset River Watershed Association. Today we have Ian Cook, who is the executive director, and Declan Devine, who's an environmental scientist. So thanks everybody for coming.
All right, well, thanks everybody for having us. Let me just get set up with our presentation here. 1 second. Okay. So as you heard, my colleague Declan and I are from the Neponset River Watershed Association, and we are so excited to have you guys here to talk about one of our favorite topics, stormwater and rain gardens, all good stuff. So just to start out with a little background here. So we have a terrible name, long and unpronounceable, our acronym's even worse, but this is the reason we have that terrible name. So basically this is the Neponset River Watershed. And a watershed is just the area of land that drains into a particular river. Does anybody know which of the 14 communities has the distinction of being the only community entirely inside the Neponset River Watershed? You're probably all muted, so you can't answer, and the answer is Norwood, of course. So the river itself starts up in Foxborough at the bottom left of the screen, right next to Gillette Stadium, and kind of wends its way northeast through the middle of this map until it finds Boston Harbor down at Dorchester Bay by the gas tank, by the expressway. So we have good landmarks. The watershed is an area of 120 square miles. About 330,000 people live in the watershed, and about 120,000 people get drinking water from sources in the watershed. So a lot going on, a lot of history here. And certainly the Neponset is a river that has had its challenges over the years, but also a really beautiful resource for residents of Norwood. And right in Norwood, great example of some of the incredible water resources you have, Willet Pond, 220 acre water body, now publicly accessible. This is a nice sunset shot. Great place to go kayaking, fishing, etc. And for historical context, we don't think a lot about swimming in the Neponset River anymore. But of course, years ago, this is actually a picture of the shoreline of Willet Pond in Norwood when it was the town beach, right where St. Tim's is, used to be a public swimming location. And Willet Pond is a water body. It's not formally monitored for swimming purposes. And frankly, the public is not allowed to swim there just at the moment. But it is clean enough to swim in. So, we think about keeping our water clean for all those kinds of uses. Another fascinating thing about Norwood, Norwood, this is a brook trout, a native trout species to our area, which has almost been eliminated from eastern Massachusetts because of development. But one of arguably the best remaining trout stream in eastern Massachusetts is in Norwood. We're actually in the midst of a project working with the town to remove a dam, the Mill Pond Dam over by Sumner Street. That'll be finished pretty soon, actually, to try to improve habitat for these fish while also reducing flood hazards in the town. But another great example of the services and the functions our waterways are providing. Another incredible resource in the town of Norwood. This is an aerial photo of the Neponset River in the area known as Fowl Meadow. This is the big central floodplain around the river. It's recognized by the state as an area of critical environmental concern, 8,000 acres of wetlands, much of it in Norwood. The top half of this screen, I think, is in Norwood. I think the bottom half is in Canton. A great haven for wildlife back there. This is a marten, I believe, which are found out in the floodplains of the Neponset River. And then, as I mentioned, another really important reason for protecting and cleaning up the Neponset River is that a lot of people get their drinking water from sources connected to the watershed. Now, Norwood does not. Norwood imports its drinking water from the Quabbin Reservoir and the Mass Water Resources System. But as the river flows through Norwood, there are communities, particularly Dedham and Westwood, downstream that do get their drinking water. So even though you're not drinking the water, helping to keep Norwood's water clean is important for other people's drinking water. And just a little bit about us. So we are a private nonprofit conservation group. And our mission, if you haven't figured it out based on what I've been saying so far, is to clean up and protect the Neponset River and its watershed, basically to restore fishable, swimmable water quality, restore and protect fish and wildlife habitats, and open the river up as a recreational resource that everybody can enjoy. This is a somewhat dated, but photo of our staff. And really, what a lot of people, when we say, oh, we try to clean up the river, people sort of think, well, what is that actually, like, what do you actually do? And fundamentally, what we do as an organization is work to bring all kinds of different people together to try to help clean up and protect the river. So that's government officials, municipal officials in particular, are really critical to creating a healthy local environment. State officials, volunteers, young people, scientists, construction workers. It takes a community to take care of the river. Some of the main things we do are we monitor the health of the watershed, monitor water quality all around the watershed. We do a lot of education work. In fact, I think Declan today was off talking to some elementary school students about stormwater pollution in Norwood in the fifth grade, fourth grade. Spent a lot of time chatting with kids. We do a lot of advocacy and organizing. Here's sort of this is not actually a picture of the Norwood town meeting, but really important decisions about the future of your water are made at town meeting. And some people would say those meetings can be a little dull sometimes, but they're really, really important. And we encourage people to be very much involved in that. And with that, so that's the overview. Declan is going to take a minute and explain a little bit about stormwater and the nature of the challenge here and how you guys are going to help us solve that problem by building beautiful rain gardens. So Declan.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. All right, so on the screen right now is a photo of a storm drain. I'm sure you've seen these before. They're on every road and parking lot in Norwood for the most part. And they serve an essential function of draining water and snow melt off of the road. If we didn't have storm drains, every time it rained, the road would turn into a river and we would have a lot more flooding. And we call that water that goes into storm drains or that runs off of paved surfaces stormwater. So what happens to water after it goes into the storm drain? Go to the next slide. A lot of people think that the water that goes into these storm drains gets cleaned or treated or filtered in some way, but that is not the case. The diagram on the left shows basically what happens. The water goes into the storm drain, into a pipe under the road, and comes out to the nearest river, lake, or stream. So there's no filters or treatment along the way. Any water that goes into a storm drain will come out one of those pipes, and any pollution that goes into a storm drain will also come out one of those pipes. We call those pipes outfall pipes. Next slide. So what kind of pollution might be on a paved surface or a parking lot or a road? Obviously, we see lots of litter, plastic bags, things like that. Dog poop, we've all seen dog poop on the sidewalk or on the road, has lots of bacteria that can affect human health as well as wildlife. Things from cars like exhaust, oil, gas, tire rubber, all accumulate on the road and wash off when it rains, as well as fertilizer and road salt. And then that photo in the upper right corner, you can see someone's raking leaves away from the storm drain. That's obviously a good idea for preventing flooding, but leaves can also be a source of pollution. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that leaves or dirt or pollen could be pollution because we think of those as natural materials. And it is natural for a few leaves to fall into the river from the trees growing nearby, but it's not natural for the leaves from every road and parking lot in Norwood to get funneled into the river through these storm drains. If we go to the next slide, we'll see sort of the impact on water quality that this pollution can have. This is a photo of what's called an algal bloom, and this is a result of nutrient pollution. So on the last slide, we saw the leaves and we saw the fertilizer. And both of those are full of nutrients, and nutrients basically are what help plants grow. That's why we put fertilizer on our lawn to make it grow more. But those nutrients have the same impact on algae as well. So when the nutrients get into the water through the storm drain system, they cause the algae to grow. And you get these excessive algal growths, which disrupt the animals, plants, and insects that are living in the water body, and can also impact human health. And this photo is an algal bloom on Turner's Pond in Walpole. We can go to the next slide. All right, so here again, we see the map of the Neponset River watershed. You can kind of identify Norwood in the center left of the map. And this map shows developed areas in red and undeveloped areas in yellow. So if we looked at this map 500 years ago, the whole map would be yellow. And 500 years ago when it rained, most of the rainwater would just soak into the ground and go into the groundwater and go into the groundwater system. But over time, as we've built more buildings and paved more roads and parking lots, now a large amount of that water, instead of soaking into the ground, gets funneled into storm drains and out to the streams. So we're sort of taking that water, and instead of putting it into the ground, we put it all into the river, and it washes away pretty quickly. We can go to the next slide. So not having that water in the ground has a couple negative impacts. One is communities that get their drinking water from the ground have less water available to them, but it also impacts our streams as well. So a lot of people don't realize that most of the streams in a humid environment like Massachusetts are constantly being fed by groundwater. So all year round, there's water actually coming up out of the ground and entering into our streams and rivers, and that's what actually keeps those streams flowing. And when you don't allow water to soak into the ground by paving over it, that water isn't available in the ground to refill our streams. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see a photo of Millmine Brook in Medfield. And this is during a drought, I believe in 2007. And each of those little silver flecks is actually a fish that has died in the stream. And so this is an example of, extended period when there wasn't rainfall and there wasn't enough groundwater to recharge that stream. We can go to the next slide. So the other big problem related to stormwater and these impervious surfaces where water can't soak in is flooding. So when we don't allow the water to soak into the ground and it runs off of paved surfaces and buildings, it has to go somewhere. And if the stormwater infrastructure, so those storm drains and those outfall pipes aren't big enough to handle all that water, it's going to go to other low areas like we see here at the Norwood Hospital. So I just explained some of the issues with how we currently manage our stormwater, and Ian is gonna teach you how to solve it.
All right, so all those problems Declan laid out, we're gonna solve them with the power of gardening. So this is actually a poster that a student did for us a few years ago to help educate people about stormwater. And it kind of says it all. So let's talk about what a rain garden is. So rain gardens can be lots of different things. This is a photo of one rain garden. It's a pretty fancy rain garden. You can actually see that, if water were falling on the street, it would come over to this area of the curb where they've notched the curb and flow into this little flower bed. It's beautifully maintained flower bed. I wish my gardens had that few weeds in them. But, pretty simple concept. And basically what's happening here is you're getting water that has pollutants that's moving very quickly off the street, and you're getting it into a place where it can basically sit still for a little while, where it can be filtered by soil, where it can soak into the ground, and where plants and insects and funguses and beneficial bacteria can help break down the pollutants that might have washed off the street into that runoff. So this is a pretty fancy rain garden. There's also rain gardens that are much simpler. This is at St. John's Church in Westwood. These folks wanted to build a rain garden. They built a little rain garden to also dress up the entrance sign. This is something they built in an afternoon. There was no, concrete work reshaping curbs, and this is brand new, so they haven't had to weed it yet. So here's just a diagram. Essentially what a rain garden is it's a man-made puddle when you get right down to it. We've sort of paved things so that the water, moves right off. And a rain garden is sort of the opposite of that. It's just slowing the water down, creating a space for it to sit and filter into the soil. Here's a little more careful diagram of the parts of a rain garden. So you can see sometimes if you want to put in a rain garden, you have a very poor soil. You might dig out a sort of big area and put in some better soil in the rain garden. You usually don't have to do that, but that's what this diagram is showing. You've got plants. We recommend native plants, which are really well adapted to the fluctuating water levels you'll see in a rain garden. And then over here, this is the key thing. You've got water flowing in. So you've got water, in this case, they've set this up so that water will flow off the street over here, get filtered a little bit through a little grass to take the leaves and big sand out. And then it'll fill up this little rain garden here. And you can see the key is that there's, sort of a smooth pathway off the street across this little bit of grass and into the puddle. And it's really as simple as that. So let's talk in a little more detail about how you do this. So one of the things to think about when you're trying to decide where you want to put your rain garden and how to design it is to think about setbacks and potential conflicts. There are places where you don't want to build a rain garden. Another big question is, how big does it need to be and how deep does it need to be? And then the third big question is, will the soil where you hope to put your rain garden, will that soil actually absorb the water? So we have throughout this presentation, I have pictures of rain gardens at a couple different sites. So this is a site, this is actually up at Zavarian High School on the corner of their parking lot. And you've got this parking lot that's draining down and into this storm drain. And right next to it, you've got this little patch that's this very neglected and sad looking piece of grass that nobody really loves and doesn't really get used for anything. And the thought was, we came out here and we worked with the students to look around to see where might be a good spot for rain garden. They said, hey, let's use this spot because the water's kind of sheeting in from the right off the parking lot. And it would like to go into that space over there. The other consideration here is there aren't really any conflicts. You know, we're out and we're away from the building. You don't want to build a rain garden that's going to create a puddle like against the foundation of your house or your neighbor's house. You know, in general, you want to keep a rain garden about 10 feet at least away from the foundation of another building. So no problems with that here. There's no like utilities or phone poles that are in the way. There's no big trees where digging might disturb their roots. So we're checking all the boxes in terms of setbacks and conflicts here. The next question is, how big do we need our rain garden to be? So usually you would make a rain garden that's a puddle that'll be 6 to 12 inches deep when it's at its fullest. And generally you want a rain garden to have a certain size relative to the area that's draining to it. So that area that's drained to it might be a parking lot, might be your driveway, might be you know, water coming off your roof, any other kind of paved surface. It could in some cases be water that you were able to intercept off the street. And in general, you know, people get kind of hung up about, you know, sizing your rain garden and doing lots of math around it. But, you know, basically you don't have to worry too much about exactly how big your rain garden is. In general, it's great if you can build a rain garden that where the garden has about 10 to 20% of the size of the impervious area that's going to be flowing into the rain garden. So if you can make it that big, that means you'll be able to basically capture and hold on to the first inch of rain that falls on that rooftop or that pavement. But you know what? If you can't make it quite that big, it's okay. If you can only make it 5% of the size of the area it's draining to, that's great. You're catching a ½ inch there. You can also make a rain garden a little deeper. So typical rain gardens only pools water to about 6 inches. You know, keeps it safe for everybody. You know, nobody's gonna get lost in it. You can make a rain garden a little deeper. You probably don't want to go more than a foot. So in some cases, if you have only a small space, you might be able to make it a little deeper and catch a little bit more water. But anything you can catch is a benefit. Here's another spot. This is before at the church, before they built it. Again, we're far away from everything. You know, we're not near a building, no trees in the way. We've got a decent amount of space here to work with to make a garden that's pretty good size. And then, and then that brings you the other thing you want to check when you're trying to pick a good spot is you want to make sure that the water is going to soak into the ground, because you don't want to create a permanent, we're not trying to create a swimming pool here, you know, a permanent pond. We want to, you know, have something where the water is going to soak in. And there's a very simple way to do that. And basically, once you've sort of picked your spot, you've checked it out, you made sure it's kind of big enough, you just dig a hole. You know, dig yourself a hole, you know, 12 or maybe 16 inches deep, maybe a foot around, and get the hose out and fill it with 12 inches of water and go away for a while until that water soaks in. So here we got the water in the middle, it's almost gone. On the right, it's completely gone. And then once it's drained out the first time, come back and do it again, but time it the second time, and see how long it takes for the water to soak in. In general, you would really like your rain garden, you'd like the water to soak in, you know, at least like an inch an hour or a half an inch an hour. Most places it's going to go much quicker than that, but you don't want it to like sit there for 6 hours and the water hasn't drained at all. So before you start, you know, going to the trouble of really building this, make sure your soils are compatible. If your soils aren't compatible, there are some things you can do, but it starts to get a lot more complicated. All right. So the next big question with designing a rain garden is you have to be able to get the water to go to the rain garden. And once it's there, you need to be able to hold on to it for a while. You need to have a place for it to sit. And there's also a really critical question here, which is when it overflows, where is the overflow gonna go? Because there's always a bigger storm. So like if you design your rain garden big enough to hold like the first inch of runoff from your impervious area, you know, what happens when there's a 2-inch rainstorm or a 5-inch rainstorm or a 10-inch rainstorm? So you definitely want to plan for, you know, those big events that you're not going to be able to capture. You don't want it to like, you know, flow over into your house or into your neighbor's house. So here's another example of a rain garden. So this is somebody who's just capturing the runoff from part of their driveway. And you can see their rain gardens are pretty good size compared to the size of their driveway. It probably meets the 20% standard. And it's really quite simple to get the water in here. The water is kind of pooling up against the edge of the grass on the edge of the pavement. And all we had to do was remove an inch or two of grass along the edge, and that lowered the height of the soil enough that the water just flows right off the pavement and into this area. So easy to get the water into this rain garden. Second question, once it's there, can you hold on to it, right? So it's a little hard to tell from this picture, but the grass here is gradually sloping towards the pavement. So we're going to dig a little hole here so that the water can flow into our artificial puddle. But the far side, the side closest to us in the picture, or closest to the bottom of the picture, is higher. So the water is never going to be able to spill over. It's just once it fills up to the height of the edge of the pavement, it's just going to stay there and the water will accumulate on the pavement and run off to wherever it ran off before. So we don't have to really worry about the overflow situation here. And we know that once this fills up, the water will hold right there nicely. So here's another example. So this was at the church, and they had to do a little more work than our first example. So you can see the paved area they're trying to capture is that parking lot in the far back. So it's a pretty big parking lot, and the water was kind of running down off to the right. So they had to dig this little, what we would call a swale, sort of like a little trench or a little ditch, people might call it, to bring the water from over on the parking lot. It's kind of running along the side of the grass. So now it'll fall into this swale and run down here. Now the trick here is that there's a bit of a slope on this side. I don't know if you remember the first picture. The land is kind of sloping down. So once they got the water here, it wasn't gonna stay here. So what they actually had to do was they dug a little bit, and they took the dirt that they dug up and they sort of piled it up around the rim to kind of make the rim of a bathtub. And that's what allows the water to stay in the rain garden once they're done building. If they hadn't built up that little edge berm, the water would have just kept running off across the grass. And then our last example is back at Xaverian High School. And here you can see, now you can sort of see what's happening when it's actually raining. So we've got water coming off the parking lot, and you can see there's not a very big height difference between the parking lot and this grass, but the grass is maybe, you know, an inch or two higher than the pavement. So the water comes down, it hits the grass and runs along the edge of the grass and comes around here and tries to go into this storm drain. So this is the trickiest example of how you get the water in and what you do with it once it's in there. And basically the solution here was to dig about 6 inches around the storm drain. And let me see if I have a better picture. So now that we've taken the soil down a little bit, now when the water comes along the edge of the pavement, it's going to get to the edge, it's going to spill into this little 6-inch deep puddle they've created. And the beauty of this is once the water fills up, it gets back up to the height of the pavement and it'll overflow out through the storm drain. So essentially they're kind of grabbing it, you know, almost when it gets to the storm drain, but they're putting it into the soil instead. And then once the soil fills up, it'll overflow into the drain. So they've got their ability to get the water there, their ability to keep the water there, and their ability to have it safely overflow somewhere in a big storm. And you can see in the back, I think it's a tennis court in the back. The tennis court's a little higher, so it'll never be able to rise up high enough to start spilling into the tennis court. All right, so now we get to the fun part, the actual gardening part, as opposed to the digging part. And the key here is to add native plants. And the other key here is to have like 18 like teenagers to do all the digging and the planting for you. That is like an excellent feature of this particular rain garden. The beauty of native plants in a rain garden is that most native plants are well adapted to our local climate, and they're used to being able to tolerate a highly variable amount of water. So the thing about a rain garden, you know, a rain garden is not like a water garden. You know, this is not like a pond that you're building in your backyard that's going to be wet for days and we need to put water lilies in it. A rain garden is basically going to fill up with water when it rains, and it'll probably be wet for, you know, 2, 4, 6, 12 hours. You know, we don't want, you know, rain water standing in our yard here for days and days, because it'll start to breed mosquitoes after about 3 days. But rain gardens percolate out pretty quickly. You know, they don't stay wet that long. So you have to have plants that can tolerate being wet, but they also have to be able to tolerate being really dry, because they can still get affected by droughts. And native plants are beautifully skilled at that. And you can fill a rain garden with flowers, like in that first one, you know, beautiful species like milkweed, bee balm, black-eyed Susans, coneflowers are all great in rain gardens. You know, a lot of weeding if you go that route, but you know, if you're a hardcore gardener, that's a great fit. You can also fill a rain garden with trees and shrubs. All right, go for a little bit of a wilder look. And from an environmental standpoint, a rain garden that is just grass, basically a puddle in your lawn, is great too. So if you've got a black thumb, you know, maybe you can have a rain garden that's really just looks like it's part of your lawn. Here's the folks over at the church doing their planting. Here's the teenage crew at Zavarian Brothers, proud of their handiwork. They actually had a contest to design the arrangement of the plants and the selection of the plants. And here's the folks at the church again. All right, and then the last thing I want to mention, you know, there's sometimes, you know, rain garden is a great term for you know, it's a beautiful kind of brand for what we're trying to do here. But there's also a lot to be said for the super lazy rain garden. You know, if you're not a super big gardener, you don't have a lot of energy to dig all that dirt, there's sometimes maybe opportunities around your property to do really simple things that can take water that's coming off your roof, coming off your driveway, coming off the street, and get it off the street and just onto some permeable soil, which is also wonderful to do. And this actually is at my house because, you know, I'm a super lazy gardener, and I have a big advantage at my house. My neighborhood doesn't have curbs. This is very hard to do if you have curbs in your neighborhood, which admittedly a lot of Norwood does. But as you can see, water is kind of rolling down the edge of the street here. And the only thing that's keeping this water on the street is the fact that this dirt is about ½ an inch higher than the pavement. So all I did was came along and I dug out about 3 inches of dirt here on the edge, and that allows all the water rolling all the way down the street to fall off the street into this soil and go into this little woody area at the side of my yard. Beautiful solution. Was essentially zero effort on my part and is just great for water quality, flooding, groundwater recharge. And then even easier is what my neighbor across the street does, where you can see this is her yard. She didn't dig this out. Her yard just happens to have this little kind of bowlish area to it. And you can see in the upper left of the picture is her mailbox. And our mailman, he is a great guy, but he loves to drive with 2 wheels of the mail truck from one mailbox to the next mailbox on the grass. And he has basically on both sides of our street created this little rut right at the edge. Maybe he's a secret rain gardener, but he's created this little rut right at the edge of the street that allows the water to spill off the street and into my neighbor's yard. So she didn't even have to dig out the 2 inches of soil. The mailman did it for her. So, but still, you know, even though that's, you know, very simple, it's not much of a garden. It's a great environmental benefit. All right. So here's just one other example. This is a little snazzier than what my neighbor did, but again, getting a little rainwater off the street into this little lower area, fill it with flowers. It's great. So if you are interested in more details about how to do this, more technical discussion about how big it should be, if you want lists of some plants that are good, we have some lists of plants that are good for sunny situations, for shady situations. You can visit our website. We have a rain garden page, which is neponset.org/rain-garden. And find lots of other resources, including links to other people like the EPA website and some other great websites that will give you, you know, more detail about how to do this than you could ever want. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Declan, who's going to talk a little bit about rain gardens on steroids, because it's really wonderful and helpful to have individual homeowners do rain gardens and help to manage stormwater. But they're also, to solve all those problems, we do also need some collective action to install things in other areas. So take it away, Declan.
Thanks, Ian. So like Ian mentioned, you guys are all going to go build awesome rain gardens, but a lot of the pavement in Norwood is owned by the town or by you know, private commercial developers. And so I'm going to talk about some different solutions the town can use to really change how they manage their stormwater. So this is an example of basically a gigantic rain garden at the Gibbons School in Stoughton that takes water from the whole parking lot and pipes it into this area where it can soak into the ground. There's a lot of different names for these large rain gardens. You might hear green stormwater infrastructure or stormwater BMP or bioretention basin, and there's like 20 other names, but basically they're just giant rain gardens. We can go to the next slide. Here's an example of some rain gardens in more of an urban environment. So before, you can see these areas with the plants and the trees. So before those were put in, this would have been a continuous curb that basically directed all the water into a storm drain. And basically they cut the curb in a few spots and put in these trenches with plants. So now the polluted water runs off the road into those trenches and can soak into the ground. And this solves the issues that I was talking about earlier, because we're now recharging the groundwater the water is being filtered before it reaches the stream. And we are also providing a lot more space for that water to be stored so that it doesn't flood. And you'll notice in that kind of smaller photo in the bottom right, there's still a storm drain as part of the system to take any overflow that won't fit in the rain gardens. Next slide. This is what's called a tree box filter. The photos on the right are of one that was installed in Milton. Basically, you put a big concrete box in the ground, fill it up with some special soil, and plant a tree in it. And then when the polluted water comes off the parking lot, instead of going straight into a stream, it enters the top of this, filters down through the soil, is filtered and the soil and tree roots, and then leaves the box through a pipe as cleaner water before it goes off to an outfall. So these are great. They don't, some pollutants will still pass through, like most road salt will make its way through, but this stops a lot of the types of pollution we talked about before. We can go to the next slide. So there's a few projects we're working on specifically in Norwood with the town to put in some of these larger green stormwater infrastructure. One is at the Savage Education Center. There's a number of locations within that center where we're looking at putting in some stormwater infrastructure. Here's an example. You can see kind of the parking lot at the top of the hill, and the water drains off that parking lot down the road. It's causing some erosion and picking up some pollution and goes into that storm drain. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see kind of what that could look like. And then again, if you were able to put in a rain garden here that could easily capture some of that water and allow it to soak into the ground instead of going into that storm drain and right out to Germany Brook. If we go to the next slide, we'll see Cleveland Elementary School. You can see currently the water kind of washes down the parking lot to the left side of the screen and then flows along the edge of the parking lot into the storm drain. And if we click ahead, we'll see how you could easily put a rain garden there that could retain and infiltrate some of that water. So both of these projects are great because it's it's pretty straightforward retrofit, and you don't have to do a bunch of repaving and installing new pipes and stuff like that. So you're able to get a bit more bang for your buck in terms of treatment and cleaning of the water. Go to the next slide. I think that's everything we had for a presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and to Progress Norwood and to the library. We are a member-supported organization, so if you want to volunteer with us or become members, we would love your help in our mission to clean up the Ponzi. And I think with that, we are ready for questions. If folks have questions.
And I would encourage anyone who has a question to go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask it directly. Or if you don't want to, you can write it into the chat and I will read it off. We did get one question during the course of the presentation, which I think you may have already kind of addressed, but just to reiterate, I guess, the question was, what happens if like 5 inches of stormwater, for example, stagnated in the rain garden for a day or two?
So if you built a rain garden that, collected runoff from your driveway or from part of the street, you would never build the rain garden big enough to hold like the runoff from a 5-inch rainstorm. You'd be digging for days and your rain garden would be 4 feet deep, and, little woodland creatures would be falling into it. It'd be terrible. So rain gardens can't really be feasibly made to be big enough to hold that much water. So the reality and that's part of why the bypass and the overflow and thinking about that is so important, because you do want to make sure that the water, when that 5-inch rainstorm happens, you do want the water to be able to flow through safely without flooding anything or causing erosion. But the rain garden itself, you really should never build a rain garden that's more than, at most holding 12 inches of deep water, and that should percolate into your soil pretty quickly.
Does anybody else have any other questions for Ian and Declan tonight?
There's a question from Rachel Churchill in the chat.
Oh, I must have missed it. Apologies.
Oh, sorry, it's to me. It's about native plants, but actually, honestly, I think you guys might be able to address this too. So she's saying that she gets a lot of runoff from snowmelt chemicals because they have a big snowbank every year. And she's wondering if there's any native plants that would be resilient to that type of material. And honestly, if you think about a parking lot having, being salted a lot and what that could do to a rain garden as far as damaging the plants.
Yes, and the answer is yes. There are plants that are better able to tolerate salt impact than others. I have to confess, I'm not enough of a plant expert to know like exactly which plants are particularly well suited for a really high, like if you're like, you've got the snowbank from the entire parking lot and it's heavily salted, you will want to make sure you're picking species that really are pretty salt tolerant. I think most of the ones that are in this flyer that's on our website, and that we're also leaving copies of this flyer at the library, hard copies, are reasonably salt tolerant. But if you have a really intense situation, I would touch base with your nursery and really ask them like what plants can really tolerate this, because salt is a really tough one.
Julia, it looks like you're talking, but you're muted.
All right, how am I doing today? So just to let everybody know, about a year ago, I put the link in the chat. We hosted Blue Stem Natives, which is a native plant store in Norwell. And they're a women-owned business. This is, I think, their second or third year, but they are so resourceful. They did have a bunch of lists of plants in the presentation, but if you go there, they will walk you through, if you wanted to switch your lawn over from grass to something else, here's what you can use instead. Or I really want a flowering shrub, but I don't want to use, something that's not native. They're really good at, solving problems like that. So I would really recommend this place, and it's worth the drive.
It does look like we have a few more questions that have come in. So we've got one here. We have mostly ledge under about 8 inches of soil. How practical is installing a rain garden here?
That could be pretty tough. If your ledge is fractured or it's sloped, you might still be able to get water to soak into it. But basically the way to know for sure is to try, dig yourself a hole if you even can, if you have enough actual soil to do that. Put some water in there, fill it up a couple times, and after you've done it a couple times, check and time it and see how fast the water goes down, and that'll tell you. You probably don't want the bottom of your rain garden to be actual rock. So if you've only got 8 inches of dirt and you have to dig 6 inches of it out to form your puddle, and that leaves you like 2 inches of dirt on top of rock, it's probably not going to be enough to sustain plants or even grass. So it may just not be a feasible spot.
Okay, so the next question that we have here, how far should you keep a rain garden from a retaining wall? You mentioned foundations, not sure if the same would apply to a retaining wall around a lawn.
I guess it depends a little bit. So I think one big question is, how big is the retaining wall? Like, is it like a really high retaining wall that, you're worried about it falling over, or is it just like a couple of little steps? Another question is the rain garden on top of the retaining wall or at the bottom of the retaining wall? So if it's a big retaining wall and it's on top and you're like right next to the retaining wall, it's probably not a great idea. I think the guideline of 10 feet, maybe even a little bit more is probably a minimum, and you may want to be a little further than that if it's a big retaining wall that could be unstabilized by a lot of water in the soil.
Okay, the next question here is, could you talk a bit about using rain barrels to catch water for use in a vegetable garden?
So maybe Julie should take that.
Geez.
I mean, I could talk about that too if you want, but sounds like Julie's the expert on rain barrels. So.
I apparently, yeah, I didn't know. I only found out about this presentation a couple hours ago, and here I am. But I'm filling in for Katie, and she is actually the best person from Progress Norwood to ask about this. But my own rain barrel connects to my downspout, and you can have multiple rain barrels too. I just have one. And basically it collects the rain from your roof, and then you can use it. You know, it's not safe to drink or anything like that. You don't want to feed it to pets, but it's great for watering your lawn, your plants. The ones that you get from the Great American Rain Barrel Company, they're these huge plastic drums, and you can get a couple different colors. They come with a little spout so you can fill up your watering can, or you can connect a hose to it. You do have to elevate it high because it does flow by gravity. There's no pump or anything. So you do have to kind of do a little bit of research, but it's definitely, it's free water, and it's, you know, a great way to capture the stormwater.
The only thing I'd add about rain barrels is a beautiful explanation. Is one of the things that's really nice about them is there's no chlorine in the water in rain barrels, which is really great for your plants. Your plants really don't. Drinking water is in some ways not ideal for your plants because it's got the chlorine in there. And then the one other thing with the rain barrel is I have a rain barrel. I love it. It's if you're somebody who is like really watering your whole lawn, you know, your rain barrel is not gonna like last that long. But if you're doing, you know, some modest sized gardens, or if you have a couple rain barrels, you know, it's great.
Okay, our next question, I think this is pertaining to the placement of a rain garden, but how far away from a foundation would you recommend placing it?
At least 10 feet is the guideline.
Okay, so at least 10 feet. What are the options if our soil drains too slowly? Someone asks.
So there's a couple things you can do if you have slow soil. If your soil is just slow-ish and not completely terrible, one approach is to basically make your rain garden bigger, right? So like if you have you know, 100 square feet of roof or 100 square feet of pavement that's draining to your rain barrel, to your rain garden, the bigger the rain garden is, the shallower the water in it will be, and it will be able to perk more slowly over a little bit longer time without being too but still drain out. So essentially by making the puddle shallower, bigger and shallower, you can deal with slower soils. The other thing you can do with soils, and some of the bigger engineered rain gardens that Declan was showing, is you can actually remove the native soils and put in fresh soil that's designed to be a little more absorbent. That's, you know, is probably going to be more than most homeowners want to do, because now now you're not just digging 6 inches, you might be digging like 2.5 feet. So take all that soil out and then bring in good permeable soil to backfill it. So your 2.5 foot hole, once you filled it back in, looks like a 6-inch puddle. Probably not a lot of homeowners are going to have the determination to do that. And then in really severe situations, which I think most homeowners are really not going to have the determination to do themselves, you can actually do that same thing where you excavate the soil out. So you like dig a 3-foot deep hole, and then you can actually lay perforated pipes at the bottom of that, and connect the perforated pipes to the drain system. And then you fill that back in, you bury the pipes and fill the hole back in. So when it's finished, it looks like a 6-inch depression. The water will flow in there. It'll soak vertically through the soil, and the soil will filter it. and then it can exit through the pipes to the drain system. But as you get into these more complicated arrangements, it does start to get expensive and a lot more work, and may not be something that a homeowner wants to take on.
Okay, our next question. So this person wonders, who should you contact when stormwater runs off a public street onto your property, causing flooding in your yard? And will there be public money available to address this problem in the future? And they're asking this from the standpoint of, building a rain garden will help with that somewhat, but not enough.
So a couple thoughts there. So one is, it depends on who owns the street. It's in most situations, it'll probably be the town that owns the street. So calling the DPW and, telling them about your concerns, seeing if maybe they can come out and take a look at it, is sort of the first step. It's possible somebody else, the highway department or somebody owns the streets, and you would follow up with them instead. The town does have a budget for stormwater management and maintaining the drain system. It's usually a pretty modest budget. One of the things the town has been talking about is possibly creating what's called a stormwater utility, which would be a mechanism more like a sewer fee or a sewer rate, but would be a mechanism to collect money for so that there would be more of a budget for drainage improvements. Because frankly, with climate change particularly, all of the communities around here are realizing they've got these old drain systems that are now facing much bigger storms, and in Norwood is kind of the poster child for this with what happened to the hospital a few years ago. But there are going to need to be more substantial investments in upgrading our stormwater infrastructure because of climate change. What the town will say when you call, I can't guarantee, but I think in Norwood, the town tries to be pretty responsive to its residents. So I'd try giving them a call.
Okay, so that's the end of the questions that have come into the chat. If anyone has any last questions, now is the time.
I just want a quick add on that Norwood also recently created a Stormwater Committee. So they are studying this as a response to the hospital flooding. I believe they may still be looking for members. So if you're interested, you can kind of contact the town. If you go on their website, you can see the agenda and meeting minutes as well.
Thanks, Julie, for adding that. So I don't see any other questions coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you again to Declan and Ian, and thank you to Progress Norwood and Together Yes. If any of you would like to say any last sort of goodbyes or anything, feel free.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks very much.